The once peaceful wasteland of the Fallout universe had become a battleground, torn apart by a war between the survivors and the raiders. What had started as small skirmishes and raids had now escalated into a full-blown war, with both sides fighting for control over the limited resources and land left in the wake of the nuclear apocalypse. The survivors, a group of people who had managed to survive the initial devastation and rebuild their lives, were determined to protect what was left of their world. They had formed small communities and settlements, working together to create a sense of normalcy in the chaotic wasteland. The raiders, on the other hand, were a ruthless group of individuals who had no qualms about taking what they wanted by force. They roamed the wasteland, pillaging and terrorizing the survivors, leaving destruction and death in their wake. Tensions between the two groups had been building for months, with each side blaming the other for the scarcity of resources. The survivors accused the raiders of hoarding supplies and attacking their settlements, while the raiders claimed that the survivors were weak and didn't deserve to survive in this new world. But the breaking point came when the raiders launched a surprise attack on one of the largest survivor settlements, killing dozens and leaving the rest to flee for their lives. The survivors, fueled by rage and a desire for revenge, banded together and declared war on the raiders. The wasteland was now divided into two factions, with each side determined to eliminate the other. Both sides had their own advantages. The survivors had the numbers and the organization, while the raiders were more skilled in combat and had a deep understanding of the harsh wasteland. The war raged on for weeks, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The once barren wasteland was now littered with the bodies of the fallen, and the air was thick with the stench of death and destruction. As the war continued, both sides began to resort to more extreme measures. The survivors, desperate to gain an advantage, started using traps and ambushes to take out raider camps. The raiders, not to be outdone, resorted to using radiation and chemical weapons to drive the survivors out of their settlements. With each passing day, the war grew more brutal and merciless. The survivors and raiders had become so consumed by their hatred for each other that they had forgotten what they were fighting for in the first place. But as the war raged on, the wasteland started to suffer. The once fertile land was now barren, the water was contaminated, and the few remaining resources were quickly diminishing. Both sides had become so focused on destroying each other that they had neglected to see the bigger picture, that they were destroying their world in the process. In the midst of the chaos, a small group of survivors and raiders came together, realizing that they were all fighting for the same thing: survival. They saw the devastation and destruction their war had caused and knew that it had to end. This group of survivors and raiders formed an unlikely alliance, putting aside their differences and working together to find a peaceful solution. They convinced their respective leaders to lay down their weapons and come to the negotiating table. After weeks of intense discussions, a peace treaty was finally signed. The survivors and raiders agreed to put an end to the war and work towards rebuilding their world together. It wasn't an easy road, as there were still deep-rooted animosities between the two groups. But with time and effort, the survivors and raiders were able to coexist and even thrive in the wasteland. They learned to share resources and work together for the greater good. The war had come to an end, but not without leaving a lasting impact on the wasteland. The survivors and raiders had lost many lives and had caused irreparable damage to their world. But through this war, they had also learned the value of cooperation and the importance of preserving what little was left. And as the wasteland slowly started to heal, the survivors and raiders promised to never forget the lessons they had learned and to never let their world fall into chaos again. The war may have been the end of their old world, but it was also the beginning of a new one where they could work together to build a better future. Yay, the end. Oh right, yeah, I have to do this stuff now. Like, comment and subscribe. And please watch my other videos and comment ideas on stories.